thank you, Professor Varga. Professor Varga is a quiet, humble expert in this field and has done a lot of bench research to help understand this disease. And has been supportive of what we do here, and thank you again for inviting me to do this talk. So I'm talking to... Is that on? Okay. Can you hear me better? So, because I'm talking to both a medical professional and patient group, I'm going to combine this talk into not just the pure medical type of talks you get, but also into some other little more patient-oriented information. And so, how I wanted to begin this was with this slide. And of course, systemic sclerosis, as you know, does have mortality associated with it. If you put them all together, it's 6% annual mortality. Every year, it doesn't plateau off. 6% per year every year. And it is an immune-mediated vasculopathy, is probably the best way to look at it. More importantly, what's not recognized in the field, but what I've known for a long time, is when you're thinking about systemic sclerosis, especially stem cell transplant, it is a matter of the heart. The heart is your largest vascular organ, so it kind of makes sense if this is an immune-mediated vasculopathy that we really have to focus into the heart. And I'll keep coming back to that in this talk. But the reason I'm showing this, you see a woman with scleroderma hands there, but the very first time I was ever exposed to scleroderma, I was an intern. First year out of medical school, I had never seen the disease before. She was only 17 years old, and she was on nasal cannula oxygen, having trouble breathing. I was called at night, being that I was on call to see her, more trouble breathing, on a face mask. And her mother and father were standing there, and you know, they would have given their lives to her, but they didn't know what to do. And the problem is, I didn't know what to do, and no physician knew what to do. It was supportive care, nothing else. And so I remember a colleague of mine in college one time saying he felt like he was an ant on a leaf in the middle of a river. He had no control over anything. And that's what this is, an ant on a leaf. That's how I felt for that young girl. All I could do is watch the water sweep over Niagara Falls. I couldn't do anything. I was an ant on another leaf, and so were her parents. So what I learned, though, is that with an idea, you can change the stream of that water. In fact, with an idea and with a thought, you can get them off that leaf and onto dry ground. Now, it just doesn't happen with an idea. It's the follow-through of that idea and the hard work that it takes. And it was 30 years ago that I had that idea, and that led to using the hematopoietic stem cells for autoimmune disease. And that's the idea that I'm going to talk about today that has really helped these patients with systemic sclerosis. So before I start, I just kind of want to give you the Hitchhiker's Guide to Hematopoietic Stem Cell Transplant. You'll see that term HSCT, that stands for Hematopoietic Stem Cell Transplant for autoimmune diseases, and key is don't panic. So we've learned certain things about certain diseases that are very important. They're little sound bites, but they are important. For multiple sclerosis, no inflammation, no response. We can't help someone in the progressive phase of the disease. Very important. CIDP, it's another neurologic disease. We do a lot of it. Importantly, the key is, if I ever write an editorial on it, I started with, is it CIDP? 2/3 of the patients come to us, even from major centers, don't have CIDP. I've already written an editorial in MS, no inflammation, no response, and I wrote an editorial on systemic sclerosis, again, emphasizing this point, it is a matter of the heart. That's where you start, okay? And at the bottom, I just wanted to show you, this is a Tesla roadster that's in space on its way to the asteroid field, and they put that sign in there, don't panic. So I just wanted to show that. And kind of remember this, a Tesla roadster, now floating in space exactly like that. That's from the camera in it, launched by SpaceX. And so don't panic when you think about transplant. There's a lot of patient support groups, our own support group. They can give you a lot of information. My staff's very well trained. They're very good at screening, and they can give you a lot of information. We've had a lot of experience. It is, of course, not a walk in the park, but if you know what you're doing, it really does help. Okay, so important point. This was a quote from Abraham Lincoln. How many legs does a dog have if you call his tail a leg? The answer's not 5, it's 4. Saying that a tail is a leg doesn't make it a leg. Unfortunately, this happens a lot, and it's happened in this field, and it's even repeated and reiterated by, quote, physician experts. And so there's a lot of myth and facts that float around, both from the lay public and in the medical community, and so I'm always glad to give talks to try to clarify some of this. So that's an important starting point, okay? And here are some myths in red. Autologous hematopoietic stem cells are a drug. I hear that all the time. They absolutely are not a drug, okay? That is wrong. They have, in fact, no direct effect on your disease when we give them to you. Okay? Autologous hematopoietic stem cells will be licensed. If they're licensed, the FDA controls them. And people can make money. That's the third point. There's financial gain behind this and somebody can sell them. That is absolutely not true. These are your own hematopoietic stem cells. We get them from you, we give them back to you. If you let somebody call out a drug and license it and make money on it, your own cells, they could do the same to your finger, your hand, your leg. What that is slavery in another form. So please stop saying the FDA is supposed to approve this. They have no authority to regulate it. In fact, you don't want a committee that you don't know who they are, you can't talk to them, and who have other pressures and agendas to decide this for you. Do not give up your free will. You want to make this decision, they are your cells. You own them. How do you know them? Because the Supreme Court was wise enough when Wisconsin tried to patent the embryonic stem cell to throw it out and say, no, you didn't create it. Either God did or nature did, but you didn't, so you can't patent it. Okay? It's not a drug. It's not patentable. Nobody should sell it to you. So what do you do to make this happen? Don't scream at the FDA. The FDA doesn't approve any transplant for cancer. They never will. They shouldn't in this field. What you should ask for is the right to try. Okay? I want patients directed that way. The right to try is a law passed by Congress, signed by Trump, but it hasn't yet passed the Senate. And what it says is if you have a lethal disease, you have a right, whether it's Medicare, Medicaid, Obamacare, or private insurance, to get potentially life-saving therapy, the right to try, okay? The final big error, and that's why I had that quote from Abraham Lincoln, is that this is a transplant. There is no transplant. It's your own cells given back to you. There's nothing foreign. So why do we give them back? And here are the truth, the two fundamental truths. Autologous hematopoietic stem cells are a supportive blood transfusion. They can graft you faster, get you out of the hospital. It's like giving you red blood cells, except we're giving you the stem cell to make those red blood cells, make platelets, and make your immune cells that are causing this disease. Okay, but we don't have to give them because our regimens are non-myeloablative. Even if we don't get them, you'll recover, you'll get out, you'll just be there 4 or 5 days longer and have more complications. That's why we give them. Okay? They're not a drug, they don't have a direct effect themselves. They're a supportive blood transfusion of your own cells. Why do we give them? What is the rationale behind this? And that's the final point, not appreciated no matter how much I talk about it. This isn't a stem cell therapy per se, even though it's called it, and we have to call it that. It's an immune regeneration without inflammation. If there's no inflammation, there's no co-stimulation. When you work in the lab, an immune cell, when it recognizes something, it'll decide to attack it or not based on co-stimulation, other signals that it gets, okay? So all we're doing is saying, rather than just chronically immune suppressing, let's knock the immune system down one time, stop inflammation, allow a rapid regeneration of the immune system, it'll default to tolerance. For 10 years I worked in the lab showing that. And that's what's missed. For any physician that complains about this field like it's voodoo magic, no. It's based simply on immune suppression, except instead of doing it chronically, one-time short bolus, and allow your stem cells to regenerate, and they'll default to tolerance. So you're criticizing everything that's ever been done in any autoimmune disease if you criticize this approach, which is often done at physicians' meetings, okay? We're not generating a new heart or new skin with it. We're letting your body repair itself once there's tolerance, okay? And so that's what it's based on, which is so different from all other drugs. There's no co-stimulation at the time of regeneration of your immune, instead of just chronically suppressing it. That's the key. Cells, I have a picture of cells down there here. These are actually iPS or pluripotent embryonic, if you will, stem cells. But cells, really, I look at them every day, I look at patients every day, and what I've realized is all we are, and you know this, is we are a collection of cells. A lot of our attributes that we give to ourselves actually, in fact, seem to exist at the cellular level. If I try to grow a single cell by itself, it almost always dies out. It's a very, very hard thing to do. It wants to be with other cells, and if you let it be with other cells, it tends to grow, but they group together in colonies. They form groups, just like this room, just like the Scleroderma Foundation, just like political parties or religions or work or whatever. People form groups, so do cells. They're happy. So if you let them overgrow in a petri dish, they get too crowded, they start dying. They don't want to be too crowded. On the other hand, like people, cells can commit suicide. Like people, and actually they do a lot during embryonic development for the good of the organism. This suicide pathway is apoptosis, is a term immunologists or geneticists use. There's a whole bunch of genes involved in it. They can commit suicide. Cells can kill other cells, and just like people, and cells can and do help other cells, just like people. So you kind of have to realize and look at this in a different perspective. And all we're allowing is that regeneration without co-stimulation, because your immune system recognizes something as friend or foe, not in terms of just a receptor binding a peptide. That's only part of it. It's just like you. If you see someone, how do you know if they're friend or foe? It's not just that you see them, it's other signals, co-stimulation you're getting, other signals the cell gets, co-stimulatory signals. For you, does that person have a gun in his hand? Are his eyebrows down? Is he red-faced? Are his fists clenched? Is he swearing? Is he coming to you aggressively? You are interpreting all the time. Is this friend or foe? And you react accordingly, and that's what your cells do. What's happened is once you get the same type of person attacking you, you can tend to generalize and avoid all type of people like that. That's called prejudice or racism, but you do it. Your immune system does that too. Once it recognizes something is bad, it keeps attacking, and it can generalize. What we do is stop it, allow it to regenerate. Without that information, it comes back as tolerance. So here's another myth. The literature says, and it says almost all the articles, some don't, but almost all of them, that the cause of death in scleroderma is the lung, and for any medical student, if you're taking a test, that's your answer. But it's not true. I asked you this, do scleroderma patients suffocate? A lot of them get on oxygen, they don't suffocate. The cause of death is the heart. Now the heart may give out because of pulmonary artery hypertension because the lung's bad, but the cause of death is the heart. It's only, I guess you've got really bad bronchiolitis obliterans or something you could suffocate, but that really doesn't happen. It's the heart gives out. You may end up on oxygen, you may be really bad looking at a lung transplant, but it's the heart that gives out. And that's the key. And it's the key for safety for what we do, and it's been long overmissed. It is a matter of the heart. Number one cause of death is the heart. So I want to see, so here's the question, there's the answer, but again, if you're taking a medical test, you put lung because that's what the literature says. And so what I'm showing you on the right is an MRI, which all our patients get, and this is a sagittal cut, so you're going right through here, this way, like you're looking from the side at this view up and down. And so the front here is the breast, the sternum, and here's the back, and then this is the heart right here. And left ventricle, right ventricle, and here's the wall of muscle going all the way around it, okay? So the heart's really two hearts in one. They share one wall. The right ventricle puts blood through the lung, which is normally very low pressure. The left, usually through the rest of the body, which is usually high pressure, but they share one wall, and that's where they can get in trouble in this disease, by sharing that wall once you get lung damage. But in any event, what I want to show you then is this picture of a patient. Why we do these MRIs, and they give us different data than a cardiac cath or an echo. But this is a very bad sign. It tells us this patient is in really bad trouble and their heart's failing whenever we see this. It's called a D sign. So what I want you to do is look right here. This should always be nice and round like it is. It will flatten. It will, even worse than that, it will show a bounce where it indents. So watch this. Flat bounce. See that? Boom. That should not happen. When we see that happen, when I see it happen in cardiac MRI, I look at them all myself. I know this heart's in serious trouble. is not going to tolerate our usual transplant regimen. Often the patients don't appreciate it because they're limited in movement because they're scleroderma. They don't move much, even if whether they're on oxygen or not. They're not appreciating their heart is failing and in big trouble. So in fact, what I want to show you is we've done this, we haven't recorded it, but if we look on MRI, something called ECV, extracellular volume, it gives us an idea of how much fibrosis there is in the heart, microfibrosis. You actually get Raynaud's in the heart and microfibrosis, just like you do on your fingers. But that, if we correlate it with the skin score, you see there's a correlation ratio. The tighter the skin, the tighter the heart. This is very important because most people just do an echo when they look at the heart. And the echo is good at picking up systolic function, contraction. But it contracts normally. It hasn't had a heart attack where you see a low ejection fraction. It contracts normally. What it doesn't do, because it's tight, it doesn't relax. It's like your skin in your joints. You can move your elbow, you can't relax it, and it gets stuck. Okay? Your wrist, your fingers. Okay? Your ventricle gets the same way. It gets tight, it cannot relax. And you can be very misled by just an echo to thinking it's normal. It's not. The tighter the skin, the tighter the heart. But it can be tight even with the skin not too affected. But that's a good thing to remember. Okay? Here's a case where if you look right here at the muscle, right here, you see how white it is? Going all the way around. Shouldn't be that way. It should be nice and dark like here. And that's inflammation and fibrosis that's really gross, that you should be able to pick up easily. Usually we have to do the ECV to pick it up. But you can get that tightening and microfibrosis in the heart muscle itself. And this is another case and why it's so important to understand the heart. This was actually a young woman. When she would get LASIK, she would hold that empty LASIK vial in her hand like a religious symbol. And she'd hold it close to her. And I noticed that, and I thought, something's wrong because her cardiac cath was normal. This patient is telling me something is wrong here. So I called up, I work with two really, really good cardiologists. I don't use the general service. And I said, something's wrong. And he went back. Now we have an excellent cardiac cath service here. They're the best, but they're extremely, extremely busy. Young doctors tend to look at numbers and they look at reports. I always tell them, look, if you don't look at the report, go look at the MRI, the CT yourself, look at the tissue under the microscope yourself, look at the tracings yourself. So we went back to the lab, and these were the actual tracings from the cardiac cath, and what that showed is discordant left ventricular and right ventricular peak pressure during inspiration. What am I saying? If you look right here, here's the pressure on the left ventricle, here it is on the right. You notice the left ventricle is dropping in peak inspiration, the right's increasing. That's a sign of constriction. And that's why she was hanging on to that LASIK. The pericardium had constricted on the heart and made it tight. It wasn't just the microfibrosis in the heart, it became tight. It couldn't relax. The echo showed normal function, but it couldn't relax. That's constriction. It's trapped in this steel cage. Okay. Normally you take a person like that to transplant, they are not going to survive. And here's the other important point. It's not appreciated by medicine in general. In this disease, just like in constriction, pericardial constriction or tamponade, but even in just a scleroderma heart with a tight ventricle, normal saline's a lethal, quote, drug. This bag, normal saline, you see it hanging all the time. So that's why when you go to our patients on the floor, there's a big sign over the bed, no fluid boluses. Don't. We teach our patients that. The heart, it's tight, it can't relax, it can't take fluid. It'll back up in the lung immediately. You'll go into pulmonary edema. You got to know how much you can give and when. That takes getting used and understanding these patients. I had a patient who we transplanted, a young girl who went in another state, went home, was in college, got a common respiratory, went to the ER. She normally, scleroderma causes a low blood pressure. You'll see 80 to 90, okay? And it causes tachycardia, but that's normal for the scleroderma, some of them. A lot of them actually as it progresses. I think why that is they're shunting. They're losing their capillaries, so they shunt peripherally is what's going on. That's why the pressure is low and they're a little tachycardic. Well, what happens when that type of person goes to the emergency room? They immediately give them fluids. And they threw the brother, who kind of knew, out, wouldn't let him be in there. She ended up dying. The ER didn't understand why. The mother was furious and called me, and what I explained to her is this is what every ER would do. Every single one. because they don't know. Okay? Cause of death is the heart. You got to remember that. Here's another scleroderma. This patient came to us, and what we originally had on the original EKG, this is the QRS. It was nice and tall. It was way up here. And it took a lot of fighting with insurance, came back in his EKG, the QRS had dropped to this. It's nothing. It doesn't exist. That means the QRS voltage is so dampened, the myocytes can't contract. They aren't contracting. This heart's in serious trouble, just looking at the EKG, and I know it. And that can happen, not clear how it happens, a diffuse inflammatory process in the heart kind of stuns it. If you leave it alone, it becomes permanent. We're working very rapidly, emergently, see if we can get this better in him so we can move forward. It's a long story. But this is what can happen to your heart, many things like that. Okay, so stem cell transplant is actually efficacious. The days of arguing it doesn't work are over. There are 3 randomized trials that say it does work. What's important for the future is to make it safer. So when you go for a transplant, for the physicians doing it, think safety and how to make it safer. Why do I say it's efficacious? Because there's 3, well, I list 4 articles, but the 2 by me, the assist there by Burt, are the same trial. I'll tell you why we reported it twice in Lancet 2011, 2013, and the European trial, and the most recent American trial, which is in the New England Journal of this year. But 3 randomized trials all show transplant superior. It is. So I don't think there's going to be another randomized trial. We know that. And I put here, remember I showed you that Tesla in space, so I put here Nikola Tesla. And I thought that was a cute quote. If you know that Magnificence 369, then you'd have the key to the universe. Well, here's 3 trials. They all worked for transplant. I think we're done with the trials. So I threw that in. I don't know what he meant by 369, being the key to the universe. I really don't, but this gentleman understood something that nobody else did, and they still don't. What he understood is that a moving electric charge makes an electromagnetic field. He knew that. So Edison came up with DC, direct current. The problem is you have to have a generator every few blocks. It's never practical. Tesla, who never made a penny in his life, came up with alternating current. His concept is don't move the electrons, move the field. Move the electrons right where you are, very in the generator, and you move the field. And that's what everybody uses. This light is based on alternating current, this computer. Everything when you turn a light on, it's alternating current. It's Tesla's idea. Tesla knew something more fundamentally important. A moving electric charge makes electromagnetic field. So how does this cell phone and television and radio work? Do you ever wonder? When you see a big cell tower, it's a moving electric charge up and down. That's all it is. That's what those cell towers are doing to make your television, your radio, and this cell phone work for you. Tesla knew that. And he also knew a moving electric charge is found in every single atom. It's called the electrons. So he knew every single atom, this wood, you and me, this table, this planet made an electromagnetic field. And he knew he could tap that for energy. And when people figured out, the investors, the bankers behind him, that he was trying to make free energy for people using the electromagnetic field of the earth, they stopped funding him. And that was it. Continued working somewhat, not in obscurity, but doing a lot of publications. So I was very glad to see, the Tesla electric car named after him. But anyway, here are those 3, and I never did understand why he said 369, but here are those 3. And I'm really understanding something important. That's why I pointed this out, because it's understanding why transplant works for scleroderma, for autoimmune diseases. It's not a stem cell drug. It's stopping inflammation and allowing immune regeneration in a non-inflammatory, non-co-stimulatory environment. That's how it really works. That's what makes it work. Okay, so now back to this. Here's the trials that have shown success. 2 were reported in Lancet. Initially, it was a randomized trial, but after 10 on transplant, 9 on control, we stopped it because transplant was so much better. And then we just went forward with transplant, and it was highly significantly better. So we went forward with transplant, reported all 90 patients 2 years later. And the European trial came out in 2014 in JAMA, 156 patients, 75 in transplant, superior, again, better for transplant. And then New England Journal had 75 patients, 33 in the transplant arm, and superior for transplant. But there's more details here that I want to point out. And so if we look at our first assist, where we were comparing two arms, and this is the skin score. The lower the skin score, the softer the skin. Transplant got much better. The ones that just got Cytoxin, maybe a little better here, and then by 1 year they're worse. If we looked at lung function, the ones on Cytoxin just kept declining. The ones that got transplant got much better. I don't have time to explain why I have two lines here, but they got much better. The lung function got better, the skin got better on transplant. On given monthly IV Cytoxin, it didn't, okay? And so we would then stop the trial, reported that, and went on just on the transplant arm. And here's our relapse-free survival. So roughly, at 5 years, 30% relapse, 70% never relapse with no more treatment. So yeah, we can figure out how to improve on this, but this is pretty stunning that they got better and never needed any more treatment and didn't relapse. And then if we look at the skin score, see out here at 2 years, quite a bit of improvement, but interestingly, it still continues to improve even out beyond 5 years. And we've consistently noticed that. Haven't had another publication on it, but that skin still can get better, not quite as rapidly, but even years later. Okay, and this is all from our own study that we reported in Lancet. If we looked at lung function in all those patients out to 5 years, initial improvement's most rapid in the first 6 months, then we're pretty much steady. I don't know why we blipped up here. We're pretty much steady after that. So the lungs kind of best improvement in 6 to 12 months, but the skin keeps improving. And I wanted to show you this lung. So we just didn't do pulmonary function. Here's a CT scan 2 years after transplant, the same section before. Well, this is diaphragm and liver under it and so forth. So that's all whited out. This black stuff is lung, and all this white haze in here, that's damage and inflammation, NSIP that you get from the disease, and look 2 years later, the same cut. It's much, much better. And up here, the computer spit out the numbers. 940 cc's of injured lung before transplant, all marked out here. Afterwards, 402 cc's. So, from 900 and some to 400. So it's quite a bit of improvement in not just pulmonary function, but looking at the lung itself and the damage in it. And nobody's shown that with any other drugs. I mean, that's pretty remarkable. If we looked at survival, our survival out to 5 years is 78%, close to 80. So 78% at 5 years. Remember that, because I'm going to point out the European data. And here it is, the European data for their curve where they did two arms, and their survival on the transplant arm at 5 years is 80%. Ours is 78. They used virtually the same regimen as we did. They had 26 centers, we had two, one here and the other in São Paulo, Brazil. So it came out exactly the same. On their control arm, survival was much worse. However, on transplant, they had a much higher upfront mortality. We had 6%, they had 11%. It's because they only used an echo to look at the heart. When we first started, that's what we were doing, because nobody knew different. But I quickly figured out some people are doing great, some have died. I can't keep doing this if I can't figure it out. That's why I started the cardiac MRI, the cardiac cathode fluid challenge, and working very closely just with one or two cardiologists, and we figured that out. And that's why by the end we only had 6% mortality, but we've gotten better and we've decreased that mortality even much more. But that's why they had that early upfront mortality, which they could immediately have if they'd done our workup, which is what they do now in Europe, and that's what their guidelines say. But let's go back to these 3 published trials. Here's the trial we did here at Northwestern. Here's the one in Europe, 26 centers. And you can see the regimens. They're all the same dose of Cytoxin and ATG, little different doses of ATG. That's an antibody against lymphocytes, anti-thymocyte globulin. That's what it called R if you get it out of rabbits. But anyway, cyclophosphamide, ATG, they're immune suppressive drugs, really very similar regimens. Here's the Scot Trial. Their regimen's different. They used a lot less Cytoxin. They used a horse ATG. It's okay. It's a little more fever with it, but it's okay. And they used radiation, total body radiation. We didn't use radiation. Theirs is myeloablative. That radiation means if you don't give the stem cells back, they're not going to recover. They're going to die. Everybody else was non-myeloablative. If we don't give the stem cells back, they recover, but it's about 4 days longer, and that's why we give it. And supportive blood product, hastens recovery here, mandated here, or you die of bone marrow failure. So anyway, if we look at the main outcome, our initial was time to failure. You can see markedly improved with transplant. That's a pretty high p-value. And if you look at our changes in the skin score and lung function FVC here and compare it to the European data, the p-values are really almost the same. In fact, they're the same right here. These are 26 centers in Europe. This is 2 centers, one in America, one in Brazil. Same results. If we go now to the New England Journal study, just came out of the Scot Trial this year. If you look at event-free survival, ITT means intention to treat, which is how statisticians demand you do it. It was not significant. If you do it per protocol, in other words, whether they got treatment or what, it was. Not highly significant, but it was definitely significant. On the other hand, if you look at the lung function, whether it's intention to treat per protocol, it did not improve, unlike the regimens that did not use TBI. So if you get the radiation, your lung function doesn't improve. If you don't, it will. And the interesting thing here, because they didn't meet the primary endpoint at 5 years by intention to treat, in the middle of the trial, they switched their primary endpoint from event-free survival to global rank composite score, which is summary of death, event-free survival, skin score, FVC, quality of life, and that was significant. The weird thing about that, I gotta tell you, because I've done enough trials, if in the middle of a trial I switch the primary endpoint, nobody would ever publish my trial. That's called data mining. You can't do that. No journal would let me do it. So I don't know how, NIH funding, whatever, it was allowed, but it was done in the middle, switch your endpoint. And the other thing weird about this endpoint, I mean, these event-free survival or lung function or skin score are hard endpoints. This had no clinical meaning. This is not a hard endpoint. It's a composite of everything there is. Okay, now, if you follow in that article by 6 years, they did meet their primary endpoint without switching it. It was significant by 6 years. But they switched it, and that made it significant. All right? If we look at late complications, cancer, you see we didn't have any. The Europeans, 1.3%. It was one patient with breast cancer. Well, breast cancer is common. 1 in 9, 1 in 10 women get it. So I don't think it's related to the treatment. But nobody got leukemia MDS. If you look down here, it was like 10% MDS leukemia, which is radiation. Everybody knows radiation does that. Okay? So here's kind of assist and ask us. The one here in Northwestern, one in Europe, use non-myeloablative Cytoxan ATG regimen. And basically, you know, you have to understand the heart when you give this, because Cytoxan is hard on the heart, and the heart's compromised to begin with. We reported that in these articles, and this is the review I wrote saying it's a matter of the heart, okay? I could talk about DLCO and the impact of heart on DLCO. That's very underappreciated, not just lungs, but we don't have enough time. And I followed up reporting, talking about the results from the European trial here in JAMA, saying again why they had that upfront mortality. The Europeans have come to recognize, so the head of the trial filed a wrote a paper, and I'm second author, as in 2017, saying the guidelines for working patients are what we developed here in Chicago. That is, you have to do a cardiac MRI and a cardiac cath, and systolic pressure, pulmonary artery pressures. Here are the cutoffs at rest. With fluting challenge, here are the cutoffs. And a cardiac MRI, if you have that septal flattening or bounce that I showed you, you can't do it. Now this fluid challenge is very, very important, and most people won't do it. Why is it important? Because when we order the cardiac cath, your NPO from midnight, and our cardiac cath lab, they're great people, they're very busy, but they do emergencies first, acute MI, whatever they're doing. You know, they need to do angioplasty, whatever. Our patients get bumped till the afternoon, they have nothing to eat or drink, they're dry, their pressure is going to be lower, okay? And what's going on, and this is a vasculopathy, and the blood vessels in the lung are stiff and hard, so they don't relax. So if you give them a fluid challenge and those pressures shoot up, that's scleroderma. And that's why we do this. Do the fluid challenge. And a normal person, they won't, because the lung vessels will dilate. And there are scleroderma patients where it doesn't shoot up, they act like a normal lung, but there are plenty where it does. And so you have to give that fluid challenge to really understand the pulmonary artery hypertension. And that's now recommended as a guideline everywhere in Europe. Of course, we follow that, but it's not necessary guidelines done in America per se. So let's compare these trials, the myeloablative versus non-myeloablative, radiation versus just Cytoxin. So unlike the trial here in Europe, the Scot Trial radiation, it does have less cardiac toxicity, and it's because they use less Cytoxin. When we started this, no one understood how bad this heart was damaged. In fact, we figured it out. I was scratching my head and I said, I have to figure this out. That's why I just started throwing in the cardiac MRI and the cardiac cath with fluid challenge, and it turned out to be very helpful. But unlike the trial done here or in Europe, where we've had no malignancies, the Scot Trial with radiation does increase, gives you 10% MDS leukemia, okay? And unlike the trials here in Europe that don't use radiation, where we did improve lung function, the Scot does not improve lung function, okay? Even at the time of the publication of the New England Journal trial by the Scot people, they stopped using radiation. It's not said that in the trial. That's not the future. But nevertheless, their trial turned out positive, and you have 3 positive trials. Nobody's going to repeat it. And what can you take from this? And what are the criticisms? Well, in our first Lancet paper, we improved skin and lung. Nobody had done that before, compared to control. But I allowed a crossover, and so that early termination of the control arm after 1 year where they could cross over to transplant, and then termination to doing only transplant, means we could not compare survival in transplant to control. That's a criticism, and it's very valid. But for me, and I've designed a lot of trials, and I understand why in the purest for a trial you don't want a crossover. But the problem is I sit at the bedside and I want and I have to do my best for each and every patient. And I'm not going to continue without transplant just to make the trial. So, but I understand that a purist and a statistician would argue and say your trial is imperfect. Ask this. Same thing as we did. They improved skin and lung. This is the Europeans. And because, although they did allow crossover, very few did the crossover. Most centers wouldn't do it. They had superior survival in the transplant arm compared to just continued drug therapy. The Scot Trial, which had a crossover, they improved skin and survival, again, by their switching to this new non-clinical endpoint. They improved survival. But even if they kept the original endpoint and waited 6 years instead of 5, it would have reached significance, as the paper notes. But they did not improve lung function and they increased risk of leukemia. And again, why they switched to this, well, otherwise the primary endpoint at 5 years is designed in the trial wouldn't have met significance. So, hematopoietic stem cells transplant for systemic sclerosis. Where do we go from here? That is, how do we fine tune or twist this treatment? And so here's another quote from Kurt Vonnegut, a writer. So what he said is everything is nothing with a twist, which is kind of cute, going from 0 to the infinity sign as you just twist it. It's a little deeper than that. It's kind of one of the things behind quantum physics now. So in any event, where do we go? So how do we twist this to make it better? Assist 2 is what we're doing now, and that's we're randomizing, comparing 2 types of transplant. I'm not going to do transplant against control anymore. 2 types of transplant and cast, because what happened is we get people, we work their heart up and say we won't do it, just won't do it. The patients would still want it, and I wasn't going to do it. And I initially had a patient talk me into it. They passed away. The family's very happy, thankful that I tried. I'm devastated. I have to use my head and not my heart. First and foremost, I have to be the doctor, not the friend. So I wouldn't do them, and then people would get mad, really angry at me. And I never expected that when I started this field. If we don't do a transplant, you get mad. But letters would be sent and things like that. So I figured out we've got to figure a way to do these bad hearts, and we did. And that's our cast regimen if you have a bad heart. We treat you under a different regimen. These are for, believe me, no heart in scleroderma is normal. Our test may show it's normal, but it's not. But still, if it meets certain criteria in our test, they can go on our trial that's randomized to 2 types of regimens. If they don't, they can go to the cast. And so for Assist 2, here's our original way we did everybody. We're still doing that if the heart checks out with cardiac cath, cardiac MRI. And here's the other regimen that we randomized to. It's lower dose, 120 of Cytoxin instead of 200. It's more cardiac friendly, but we added fludarabine. We keep the dose of ATG the same. I can say we're in the middle of this, and it's not good to talk about results until the trial is over. It's considered taboo, but we're getting very good responses here. I don't know if they're any different, but I kind of think maybe if your kidneys You're high risk of renal crisis, you have the antibody for it, anti-ORM3 polymerase, this might be better. And if you do have it, this may not be as good on the kidneys. Now, we don't know until we complete it, but this is working, and let's see if they end up the same efficacy, and if one's better for one particular type of scleroderma than another, provided the hearts are acceptable before the procedure. If you have a bad heart, here's our CAST trial that we use, and you notice we only give 60 of Cytoxan, much less Cytoxan. So, because Cytoxan will be hard on the heart, so we're giving a lot less. Instead of 4 days or 2 days, we give 1 day. We make up by adding 4 days of fludarabine. And the other is that the period of neutropenia is much shorter because a bad heart does not tolerate neutropenia. It just doesn't. We also threw in Rituxan. So that regimen's ongoing. It's actually going good. You know, I was worried maybe we won't get any responses. We're getting good responses. How durable they will be, I don't know. But we're taking people we otherwise couldn't do, you know, who by cardiac cath or MRI we said we wouldn't be able to do, and we're getting them through and they're getting better. All right, so what's the future then of transplant? It's what we're doing here is that doctors know this. When you go see a rheumatologist, they may decide, given your picture, to use one drug and not another. They can choose. Well, again, the stem cells have no therapeutic effect. They're not a drug. It's the regimen you're using. So modify the regimen for the patient, like you would normally do when you treat a patient with drugs in clinic. So I think in the future, we'll use a regimen that's optimized for each patient based on cardiac function. We're already doing that. If you've got a bad heart, you go to a different regimen. Risk of renal crisis. I think in the future, we'll probably be doing that. There may be other factors. I can't say that GI involvement will affect our regimen. It might. Certainly, gave and bleeding is a serious thing, so people get scoped and we cauterize. And again, there's a problem there. If it's done on the outside by someone on the outside, they'll say, oh, okay, gave, they're not bleeding. They won't cauterize it. Well, gave oozes blood very intermittently, and you drop the platelets, can rip open like a fire hydrant, so it doesn't matter if it's bleeding that time, you cauterize it. The people here who do endoscopies understand that. On the outside, they won't, so that's why we don't want it done on the outside. But we know improves survival, transplant, we know improves skin, we know improves lung. As I said, the main cause of death of the heart doesn't improve heart function. These are things we'll be reporting on in the future. We've got preliminary data that it does. I'm waiting for my cardiology friends to publish it. They should be the lead author. They are so busy it hasn't happened. They put in an abstract showing it improves heart function. Hopefully they'll get done. If not, eventually I may take it over, but you know, we're all very busy, but it does. Does GI function improve? Well, anecdotally, caring for these patients, I can tell you it does. That would have to be another paper. The one thing we can't assess is the reflux, the GERD. That still persists. Does esophageal motility improve? To try to study that, we did start with IRB approval to put a manometry down, a balloon to measure contractions, and patients hated it. They hated that more than transplants, so we just stopped it. We'll never answer that question. Patients don't like it. Crest or calcinosis. Initially, we wouldn't do crest. It has much more calcinosis, a little different than scleroderma, similar but different. But we found we can reverse that calcinosis. We've not published it, and we do that now. I want to show you, this is a patient when she came to me, she was a surfboard, couldn't sit up, couldn't transfer, couldn't toilet herself, couldn't move at all, really. Her husband carried her, put her on the exam table, her legs were up from the wheelchair. I pushed her legs down, her chest went up, pushed her chest down, legs go up. Here she is now, and she's, of course, okay doing this, showing the video of her. From wheelchair bed, unable to transfer to this. So when he said, you know, this disease is an anaconda inside him that's squeezing him a little bit more every day, I thought that was such a perfect description. And when he said stem cells, the future of medicine, I think he's absolutely right. And for me as a physician, I see people lose function and no hope of getting it back, and then it comes back with no further treatment, nothing more rewarding. In any event, this is my team. Carol used to be scleroderma nurse. She has retired and been taken over by Susan, those of you for scleroderma outpatient nurse. But that's the team, and Dr. Han's here right now. Got some cool looking shades. And because American College of Rheumatology is here, a rheumatologist from Nanjing, China is here, who I've spoken in Nanjing, and also a rheumatologist. They're both professors from Oslo, Norway is here in our audience, and I've spoken there. And they are using our treatment there in Norway now. We've treated people from Norway, but it's so much better if they don't have to come all the way here. My final slide, we're out of time. Transplant for systemic sclerosis, don't panic, but go to the right program, okay? Because it's a rare disease, and there's a lot of important details, and it's very important you go to the right program, right place. It's nothing ever going to be done in every university. Just be aware of that. Thank you.